Hello, my name is Lorraine Marcone and I am the guest host today for Fit TV. Today I'm going to have a general conversation about mediation with divorce mediator Chris DiMaggio, founder of FIT Mediation Services on Long Island, as a current litigant in the courts with some specific questions and situations. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Chris, I am in divorce court right now. I've been in for 5 years without resolution. How would mediation have helped me save all this anguish?
Yeah.
And there's been a lot.
Yeah. Well, if you're in for more than 5 months, you suffered unnecessarily. Generally speaking, it doesn't take any more than 3 months to mediate if somebody's diligent about their process. And then there's only the time it takes to process a divorce in the courts, which sometimes takes a couple of months beyond your period of time. But 5 months, 6 months is fairly normal for beginning to end. Doesn't really need much more time than that. So unfortunately you were tied up in the court and it really didn't help you, and the lawyers and the judges have to run their course, and the court officers and the parking lot attendants all have to get paid somehow, so that's how that goes.
You know, it always seems like there's a delay. There's always another part of this that's being pushed out. And it's very frustrating because you've got two people together in the courtroom who are sometimes contentious, sometimes not. My situation is contentious. I tried to go with a mediator before I started with the attorneys. Lawyers are not our advocates.
What
That's my
happened with the
opinion.
mediation? Did he not?
He was not amenable to it because he was not amenable to the divorce.
So your soon-to-be ex was not amenable to either kind of settlement.
Nothing
okay.
at all. No.
The one bad part about being in the state of New York is that there's not a hell of a lot of option for a litigant to go to a mediation. There's no real avenue to get there. The problem is that New York is not a mediation-friendly state, and you know, the lawyers, once they get a hold of it, will talk you out of settlement because then they don't have as much money to make. It inhibits the amount of money they can make, so when mediators get involved. So we're for peaceful solutions, quick solutions, everything's perfect, that's what you want. So the lawyers basically, without knowing so, are basically saying, no, that's not what you want. We want you to pay for as much of our time as you can give. Mm-hmm. And that's what kind of like ends up happening. It's very sad that New York is so late in the game with, like other states have it as a mandatory process. Mm-hmm. You have to get your mediation a parenting plan done, and you have to organize your kids' lives and make sure the finances are all meted out in what works for the couple. In your situation, why it's taking so long is they can delay this as long as they want, pay for as many court appearances as they want.
Right.
You are no longer in control of your life.
Mm-hmm. And New York is the beacon.
Yeah.
So this protraction, is it due to the preponderance of attorneys in the state? Is it as simple as that?
Yes,
Or
yes. It's basically that is the reason. Because if you have a lot of people pooled into an area to accomplish something, and they're available, the government, in a way, is affiliated with that part of it, because the judges need to operate, the court officers, the parking lot attendants I had talked about, all connected in one marsh of what needs to happen to a divorcing couple in their eyes. It doesn't work that way for you as the couple. It doesn't work that way for the kids. There isn't any other good reason. That's the problem I have with a court-ordered divorce. You're heading into an area where there's too many reasons for them to exist, for them to get paid, for them to control your lives, for you to lose your control, for you to lose your money, for you to lose your access, and for you to be depleted of your time that you spend with your children. Mm-hmm. So it's like as if, you know, what would you choose to eat? Would you choose the end of that table or an apple? Mm-hmm. It's actually that bad. You very rarely ever hear anybody who goes through court. It doesn't have a continuing problem that doesn't go on forever.
As somebody who's going through this, it's very difficult to not take it personally. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that from a lot of people. So I think that many of us are in the same situation, the same boat. Can you put a salve on that for us? You know, can you give us an idea of why it's not about our case specifically, our kids, us?
Well, the aspect of it being personal, that is what it is, and I'm going to ask you to go to Book 17 in the West Law Book and find out what case you can actually put into your life and say that that's the reason why I'm here in court, because there's a case that happened 20 years ago that has a relationship to what I have done. There is no longer that connection. So the aspect of personal need is missing. Personal want, personal existence, it's all missing from a solution. It's about what existed prior, what can be called a law, even though it's not really. Someone else's life is not yours, even if it does read the same. When we trained as a mediator, we went through case laws, and we looked at all the case law. There's a lot of lawyers who become mediators, so in our grouping of training, there's 50 lawyers and 50 mediators, psychological professionals. So you get to see what the case law is like, because that's what they want to do. They want to keep the lawyers involved in it too. Even though it's opposite their training, because lawyer training is about assigning, zealously protecting your client and fighting and killing the other. It's win and lose, win and lose. In a mediation, it's win-win. So, did I answer the question?
It seems so simple,
Yeah.
the way that you put it. But when you're in this, it's so complicated, because
You're
there's
trapped.
Yeah, you're trapped, and there's this particular individual that you've got to deal with. You've got, you're worried about the kids. Everybody's worried about the kids. But I think what I'm hearing you saying is that, just like everything else in our society, we have become numbers. So we can refer back to, the lawyers can look back and say, oh, she fits into case, or he fits into case
Johnson
5
versus Johnson.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that depersonalizes the whole process, which
Right.
in turn protracts the process,
Do you
because
think-
everybody's defensive.
Do you think in any way possible that Johnson versus Johnson in 2004, though they have 2 kids like you have 2 kids, and they're girls instead of boys, and that the interest lies are different, can you line that up? Well, how can you line that up? How can you say that the 2 girls want the same thing that 2 boys do? It's kind of a simple way to look at it. Girls have different needs than boys do. We're in different worlds.
Correct.
And they can't solve with discussing the 2 girls situation in Johnson versus Johnson regarding custody easily when it comes to what they do and what they spend, which is all still part of the personal aspects you talked about before. It doesn't really relate to the Johnson versus Johnson's decision made at the appellate division in Brooklyn in 2004, whatever year I chose before.
And that's not even taking into account the psychological makeup of each child, irregardless
That's right. You can
of sex.
take it forever, sure.
Of the sex of the child. But it's very important to look at each child differently, because
Sure.
each child is going to be affected sometimes for the rest of their life.
Sure. When
So-
Mr. Smith, in your case Marcone, wants to stay involved with the football program that this kid is in, how is that going to relate to Mrs. Johnson from 10 years prior in terms of the child needing a special needs of some kind?
Correct.
So it's very difficult to match case law with the current existence, because it is personal. It's your children. So what you want to think about is, I'm going to go to mediation. Why am I going to use a mediator? Because I want to keep my power. I want to keep my decision-making ability. I want to do what's right for my kids. I don't want to do anything close to what Johnson & Johnson has over there.
Correct. You know what's difficult? I think if you have so much vested into the children and into their health, what happens a lot of times, I feel, is that you go into court. You've been your child's advocate for so long as the parent. Now you're pitted up against the other, your spouse, and it's not where you want to be, but you end up there. And if you speak up and you tell the judge, and this is either party, that's not true. You know, you get slapped. And in a sense, I remember very, very early on, I was told, you don't understand. This was not by the judge. Obviously, it was a lawyer. And he said to me, you don't understand, Miss Marcone. The judge is God.
Did you
That
love
was
to hear
hard
that?
to take. That was really
I've heard
hard
that
to
too.
take.
I've heard
and,
that too. Yeah.
You know, I'm an outspoken person, so for me to get slapped on the wrist for trying to protect my kids was, you know, or trying to advocate for my kids. Not even, I have no problem with my husband seeing my children.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to be fair about it. But in my situation, you know, there was a lot of contention on the other end. And I really wanted, and I would love for you to talk about this, the role of a parental coordinator, or your basic LCSW, who will come in and, you know, mediate if there's issues. How does that fit into mediation, parental coordination and mediation?
Well, in that domain, in the court's domain, there's different operatives. In my world as a mediator, I do the parent coordinating with the couple. I don't need another professional.
Oh, okay.
I am the psychological professional.
That cuts down on the cost also.
Right, but the only difference is that they're telling you as a court ordered person that there's a reason to handle the family in a certain way, whereas a mediator would listen to the couple's operatives within their own lives and discover, or help them discover, the best way to handle their kids. So we don't really command anything or determine anything. We're moving the couple's facilitative ability to make decisions on their own. We facilitate the response.
Does a mediator, give me a little background in terms of what you have to do to get to that point. Do you need to take some undergrad, you know, psych classes? Do you need to be an MSW in training? You know, how does that work?
I'll say yes and no to both people, because it really depends on you, your work, your ability to learn, and who you are as a person. Like, my expertise is just a little bit outside what an MSW would be, or LCSW. Social workers are good for discovering parenting plans, yes, but mediators are good for that, and the child support, and the sharing of the custody, and the best interests of children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have the mental health professional, which in my opinion is better than a lawyer to go to, because lawyers
I agree with you.
Lawyers do what? They zealously protect their client. They're going to tell you what to do sooner or later, because that's what their job is.
Correct.
Mediator's job is to find out what it is that's best in your best interest, and see if you can meet out the problem that you have with your soon-to-be ex, and what is his interest, and if his interest is close to what your interest is, or if we can get that closeness to come in terms of a compromise or settling what the parent education should be like, then we make that work. We just push that together.
You know, I'm going towards thinking that it would probably be less upsetting to the one parent that doesn't perhaps want the LCSW.
He's going to play a bigger part.
Yeah.
When
you won't feel as much under the gun,
you
you
know, feel
know,
intimidated by a
or
process
being
that
psychologically,
doesn't,
you know.
it doesn't allow him to talk or think or say anything out loud, and he's given up the power to a lawyer who's going to protect his interests, and a judge that really doesn't know you from Adam. And think about it. When you go to have a judge make a decision, the judge who you said before was God, he doesn't know you from Adam.
Not at all.
But will your ex-husband know the needs of your children close to where you want to? Isn't that a better probability?
Absolutely.
All right, so you can meet that out pretty easily because you're in the same family. You don't have to go calling somebody else to find out what they think.
Right.
You're here. You might as well do it now, because this is the information center, the family itself. The kids' needs are right on the top of your mind. They're right here, written on your forehead. Same thing with him. Now, even if he differs and you want to find a solution that's hasn't been available to you, that's where the media facilitates the agreement. He brings in what is the flavor of why you're asking what you're asking. What is his objection to what you're asking for, and the flavor of what you're asking for? And we sort that out and come up to a compromise position. And then if somebody's still in a disagreement, we say, can you get any closer to a solution with her?
Mm-hmm. Without,
because you're in the same realm now. You're close to, I'm not determining anything, remember. Is there a way for you to come a little closer to what she wants? Or, Lorraine, is it possible for you to get a little closer to what he wants to make something work?
Mm-hmm. And that's without either party feeling as if they're being psychoanalyzed, back in Freudian times. Because I think people, some people are amenable to therapists and some people aren't. So it's good to have somebody, in my opinion, like yourself, who is just trying to...
What strikes me is that it's an antiquated system.
Mm-hmm.
Divorcing in court is an antiquated system.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't any fundamental need to have somebody step on you.
Right.
But that's what they're going to do. They're going to step on what you want, they're going to step on what he wants, and they're going to force you into a situation where you're going to end up paying for it.
That brings me right to the crux of, I think, how a lot of people feel, at least how I feel, that it becomes a war. It becomes a war. And it's not good for anybody. It's not good for, the children's health. It's not good for my ex's high blood pressure, my high cholesterol,
Really.
Whatever it is.
It isn't good for anybody to start out finding a solution in a war zone.
No, because you don't think straight.
Yeah, when you're all upset about things and you're contemplating killing your significant other, you don't.
And you've got armor on.
Yeah,
you can't be yourself.
Yeah, it stops you from being real.
Yeah.
It stops you from being connected to the real issue in your family, whatever that might be.
To being, you're still a unit, no matter what.
Right.
Till the day the children, until we predecease them.
If I could just extend that a little bit, that's one of the problems that families have, and they think that because they're divorcing their significant other, that will be it. That I'm starting new. When you have kids and you think you're starting new, you're only starting new for yourself. The family as a unit is still going to be connected to some degree. A lesser degree than when you live together, but you're still going to be connected to some degree.
Absolutely.
Value that connection because the kids undoubtedly
see it, feel it. It's palpable to them.
Right.
That's what I think is so hurtful. For the kids and for both parties.
Think about you going to court and your attorney says, well, we can get him here. We have everything working our way, but you have to kill him first.
That's a very good example.
You know?
Because that's exactly how you feel. You feel that the attorneys are just trying to go after.
That's their job.
Yeah, that's their job.
That's why you don't want to be there.
Right. Exactly.
That's why you don't want to be in a place where you're giving up all that power. I would say that the person who has no power in a relationship, in a mediation, does well. Why do you think that is? Probably don't know the answer to that. It's rhetorical, but I'll tell you.
Yeah.
When you have no power, the mediator facilitates your power, brings you into the normal relationship that you could have had that you didn't have. It's often some of the reason why occasionally 1 in 15 couples will reconcile right there at the mediation table, because suddenly the person who didn't really have power outside of that mediation develops power by mediating. It's a qualifier to join into a communication. And very often, well, I don't know what the numbers are. I don't want to get into who was more and who was less powerful in that situation. But basically, you're helping yourself when you have no power by being in a mediation setting. The mediator sees the power difference.
And you know what I'm just thinking, with the little time that we have left, when you have two people and each one has a lawyer, they're fighting, your mind is not in the right place for a lot of reasons, but you're not getting equal representation. What it sounds like to me with mediation is that both parties are getting equal representation. That's not the case.
That's a good way to put it.
You can throw out the domestic relations law of 2010, which says that each party is entitled to the same amount of representation as the other, because that's just not what's happening.
Right.
So if you go to a mediator, rather than one person who has the moneyed spouse spending 10 grand, 15 grand just for upfront costs, and then God knows what else, and then you've got somebody else, the other party, that doesn't have that kind of money. You're not getting the same representation. That's not fair to anybody.
That's right. And the missing people in that room are the kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're not there to put in their 2 cents. When you're mediating, if you run into a problem with the kids, you can bring that problem home and say, what do you think of this, kids? You can actually bring the kids into the room during the mediation if you wanted to. You can't do that in court.
Correct.
You can bring grandparents in who are nearby, who want to babysit for them. You can do all kinds of things in the mediation process because it's inclusive.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the most wholesome way to deal with this, and I wish that I had known about it. Because I knew about it, but I didn't know enough about it to really press for it.
Sooner or later, that the common sense will come to bear.
I hope so.
It has to, because there's too many people getting killed in court right now, losing their assets, losing the connection with the kids. Child dysfunction is on the rise because they're subject of the penalties, the psychological penalties of divorcing in court.
And because they're picking up on their parents' pathology at
That's
that,
right.
at a certain point, they're seeing the breakdown of one or both of the parents'
they get more
mental
respect
health.
for you. Sure, they have more respect for you working out your problem with their father than they would if they saw them clashing every time they came home, throwing the keys down, disrespectful, leaving the house. And you don't do in mediation. You get together with these things. You don't really take them apart.
I've said it before. I think it's a win-win situation,
Exactly
and I
right.
wish I could hire you now. Can't do so. Chris, thank you so much for explaining and extrapolating a little bit more into mediation.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Societal and political trends are rapidly breaking down the family that once was the cornerstone of our great American culture. At FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we bring it to you every week. We invite all opposing views. My name is Lorraine Marcone. Thank you for watching FIT TV. We'll see you again next week.